Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. I teach at the University of Colorado Boulder, previously at UC Berkeley and UCLA. Today what I want to discuss is the völva, or Norse Seeress, and a little bit about the magic that she is said to practice, known as Seiðr. Now in Old Norse there is a conceptual gulf between basic magic, what's called galdr, or in the case of magic spells specifically, ljóð, and this art form Seiðr. And Seiðr can sometimes be translated into English by something like dark magic or witchcraft, reflecting the fact that it's supposed to be something sort of negative, something bad to practice. But that negativity seems to apply mostly to men, because this is considered a woman's art, and so practicing it is unmanly. And of course, there's nothing worse you can be in Norse society than unmanly if you're a man. The association of magic in general with unmanliness is kind of there. You see in some sagas, Bosa Saga Okeros is an example where a hero will reject any kind of magical help because he sees it as somehow infringing on his manliness. But the association of Seiðr with unmanliness, or what is called erki, the state of being arkr, is particularly strong. So let's start off by considering some of the origin of the art called Seiðr. In Ynglinga Saga, the first constituent saga of Snorri Sturluson's Heimskringla, or History of the Kings of Norway, he says that it was Froya, daughter of Njordr, of course these Vanir gods, who introduced the Attire to Seiðr, that previously it had not been practiced among them. Now, elsewhere in the prose and poetic Eddas, we find indications that the Vanir have a lower threshold for sexual shame than the Attire do, and so that may be somewhat associated. We also see that in Lokasenna, Froya is accused of being much mixed with curses by Loki, which might have something to do with her practice of Seiðr. Now, the term for a practitioner of Seiðr can be quite simply Seið kona, Seiðr woman, or Seið madr, Seiðr man. Sometimes we see Spå kona, prophecy woman, since Seiðr magic is strongly associated with the art of telling the future. But then there's this special word, volva. Now, this is not related to this. People always ask me this, so I'm just going to clear this up. This is not related to the English word that kind of sounds like it, which is ultimately from Latin. Volva is related to the root in Old Norse volur, which is a staff. So presumably this is sort of the staff woman. This is a staff bearer, and a staff must have in origin had something to do with her art or dress. The possessive or genitive form of volva is volu, and that is why you see, for instance, the title of the poem, Volu Spå. Spå meaning prophecy, is the prophecy of the volva, prophecy of this Seeress figure. Now, the volva, as she is portrayed as a character in most of the sagas or in some Eddic poems like Völuspá or Baldursdramar, is a traveling woman who is paid to dispense her prophecies. Odin does pay the volva in Völuspá, and stanza 29, in the Codex Regius version, he gives her rings and necklaces. And elsewhere we see this notion that the volva traveling around is paid by whoever is hosting her. So basically it seems like this is a traveling fortune teller who will come to a given, typically probably wealthy person's house in a district, and then that wealthy person will invite other people in the area to come and attend a feast where the volva will then give everybody their fortune. In one saga, Eirik Saga Rauða, Saga of Eric the Red, we have a very complete description of a volva's dress and attitude. And I have translated this chapter of Eirik Saga Rauða, chapter 4, into English. It's been posted on my Patreon page for quite a while, but I'm going to read you some of this. Keep in mind that my translation of color terms is often different from that of other translators of Old Norse, as I consider the term blor to actually mean blue and not black. And when she came in the evening, together with the man who was sent for her, she was dressed in this way. She had a blue cloak with a neck string over herself, and stones were set in it all the way to the hem. On her neck she had glass beads, and on her head she had a black hood made of lambskin, which was lined with a white catskin. And she had a staff in her hand with a knob at the top. The staff was decorated with brass, and it had stones set in it up to the knob. She had a belt tied around herself, and there was a large sack on it. In that sack she kept her talismans, which she needed in order to make prophecies. On her feet she had shaggy shoes of calfskin, which had black shoestrings and big tin knobs at their ends. On her hand she had catskin gloves, and they were white inside and shaggy. So not just her equipment and clothing, but also her meal is described. In the evening, the tables were taken up, and it might be told what kind of food was prepared for the Seeress. A porridge was made for her from the milk of a young goat, and the hearts of all types of living creatures that existed were cooked for her. She had a brass spoon and a knife with an ivory handle with brass on both ends, and the tip of the blade was broken off. So she's wearing the skins of many different creatures, and she also eats the hearts of all types of living creatures. This has always reminded me of the passage in Adam of Bremen's description of the temple at Uppsala, where he says, Ex omni animante quod masculinum est, novem capita offerentur. From every living thing they sacrifice 9 of the males. So some notion perhaps that she needs to wear and consume parts of, quote, every living thing. Of course, there's more than 9 or whatever Adam says there are, but this presumably has something to do with the common conception of Norse magic. It's also notable that, of course, she wears this hood lined with catskin and the gloves of catskin, and Froya, who is said to have brought Seiðr to the Attire, is associated with cats. In the Prose Edda, we have this note from Snorri. He says, "En hon fer, þó ekkar hon kottum tveim og sitter I reið." But when she, Froya, travels, she drives her 2 cats and sits in a chariot. And she also, of course, holds a staff, and we may remember that völva is related to a word for staff, völlr. Now, the actual description of how this is performed, how her prophecy is performed or delivered, involves calling on spirits with some kind of song known as vardlokr. So the völva asks whether any women, it seems to be specifically women again, Seiðr being a feminine art, know these vardlokr songs. And finally, a woman named Guthrid says that she does, but she doesn't want to sing the songs because she's a Christian. But they prevail upon her to do it, and here's what we read about that. The women then positioned themselves in a circle around the scaffold that Thorbjorg, that's the völva, sat at the top of. Guthrid spoke the poem so beautifully and so well that no one who was there thought he had heard the song sung with a more lovely voice. The Seeress thanked her for the song and said that many spirits had now come to them and thought the song was beautiful to hear when it was so well delivered. Notice that the völva sits on a scaffold. She is often described as positioned high, sitting on a high seat or scaffold or ladder or something like that. That word vardlokr only occurs in Erik Saga Rauda in this chapter, so we don't know what this is. It does look interestingly like the English word warlock. If you were just to look at it and straight up try to etymologize it, it could be something like guardian locks, but then how is that? Songs, right? So unfortunately, we don't know too much about the word. Now, there's another interesting account of a völva that I have included as a special bonus translation on my Patreon. This is the poem Grógaldr, in which a völva named Groa casts some spells on her son when he is about to go and try to claim an inheritance that's been denied to him. And interestingly, in stanza 7, she refers to the spell she's putting on him as Urðr's songs, the songs of Urðr the Norn. So that may be one of the spirits that is being contacted with the art of Seiðr. You're actually contacting perhaps the fates and channeling their decrees through the speaker of these songs. Now, as to the staff, it's interesting to note that some graves in Birka, a Viking Age town in Sweden, not too far from Stockholm, which has a lot of very interesting grave sites, including the one that everybody was arguing about for several months in fall that was potentially a woman warrior. has some graves that have been identified as graves of volvas, and these include staves, right? And so one of those is the one that I always find called 660/760. I think this might be two graves that got mixed, but it has a staff that has a cool looking snake face on it. And then there is another one, Birka grave 845, that has a woman buried with not just a staff and a little treasure chest, but also a drum. Now this is interesting because in Lokasenna, stanza 24, when Loki accuses Odin of practicing Seiðr, he says, "But people say that you practiced womanly magic." That's how I translated the practice of Seiðr here. There's a verb, sika, which means to practice Seiðr. On Samsoi, og draptu og vet sem volur. Now this has given translators some trouble, this line. And you struck draptu or vet on a vet like volur. Volur is the plural of volva. So what is the vet that's being struck on? When I first translated this in my translation of the Poetic Edda, published in 2015, I took drepa or to strike on as in a somewhat rare sense, which is to put on clothes. And so I assumed that vet must be some kind of clothing. Vet is not tested outside of this poem, at least this word with a short E. So it's kind of anybody's guess what exactly it means. It doesn't seem to be particularly related to any words in other Old Germanic languages that we know of. But a lot of people have also seen this as possibly a drum, because you drepa or strike on a drum too. So maybe what is being accused here is that Odin struck a drum, if this is some characteristic volva thing to do. He goes on to say of Odin, "You lived as a witch," or magic practitioner Vitki, this is actually related to the word that becomes English witch, "among the humans, and I call that a pervert's way of living. Arks adal," right? The way of living, the nature adal of someone who is arkr, right? Sexually shameful, not a dringer. So, in one saga, there is an interesting connection that we can kind of indirectly make about these drum possibilities. In Vatnsdøla saga, the art of Seiðr seems to be a Sami art. Now the Sami are an indigenous people of northern Scandinavia who are culturally and linguistically not related to the majority Scandinavian culture. Their language is Uralic, related to Finnish, Hungarian, Estonian, and many languages of Siberia, and they have a completely different trajectory into Scandinavia and an unrelated culture to the Norse culture. Often in the sagas they're regarded as being sort of magical, and it is true that the Sami have traditionally practiced magic using drums, or divination, I should say, using drums. And so possibly there is some kind of influence from Sami custom on this art of the volva. But also, like I said, in Vatnsdøla saga, the people who practice Seiðr, the volvas, are uniformly Sami. In an early scene, there is a character named Ingjald who is said to, quote, make Seiðr in the old way so that men could search out their fates. What he does is he invites a volva, a fjolkunnig, Sami woman, fjolkunnig means magically knowledgeable, who is put in a high seat, as we've seen is characteristic of the volva, dressed splendidly, and then each man goes to her at this feast and asks about his fate, his urlog, a common word for fate that we also see in the poem Völuspa. Now, a man named Ingimundur does not want her to tell his fate, but she tells it anyway, and what she tells him is that he has a magical, he has a talisman, a little idol of the god Freyr that he keeps in his pocket. This is actually something that we've found archaeological examples of, as I've discussed in another video. And she says that it's missing now, and he checks his pocket and it's gone. She says that it has gone to the place in Iceland that he must now settle in. And after some resistance to this, he actually recruits some Sami men and pays them in butter and tin to, quote, go to Iceland to figure out where his idol is. Well, they don't jump in a ship and sail to Iceland. They have him lock them inside of a house and not speak their names to anyone. And then they send their spirits in flight to Iceland, and they find the idol. Of course, this is interesting. It does not seem to reflect other practices of Seiðr in the sagas, but it does suggest, again, that the Sami might have been considered to be sort of the masters of Seiðr. Other sagas have similar scenes where the völva, usually not explicitly a Sami woman like she is in Vatnsdæla saga, will come and preside over a feast where she's placed in some kind of high seat and will speak the fates of the various men coming to her. One of the most famous examples is from the saga of Eru ad Orvar Odds saga, where again we have the hero Odr, who is reluctant to hear his fate told and threatens that he'll break the völva's nose if she does tell it. She tells it anyway. He does hit her in the face with a stick afterwards, but what she tells him is that he is going to be killed by a horse named Foxy, common Norse horse name because it just means mane. And so having heard this, he decides he's going to do something about it at least. He kills that horse Foxy and buries it in a deep grave. He then goes on to live 300 years, but eventually he gets homesick and he comes back to this farm where he grew up, his foster father's home. And as he's walking along, he happens to stumble upon the skull of Foxy because the cliff has eroded away in the past 300 years, stumbles on the skull, and a snake comes out of the skull and bites him, and that kills him. So it's a reminder that whoever and however the völva is accomplishing her visions of the future, fate is always absolutely fixed in the Norse conception of the universe. From beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.